Words have incredible power. They can make people's hearts soar, or they can make people's hearts soar. Said by Dr. Marty Groth, a psychologist who has given more than 500 seminars on the topic of effective leadership and proper public speaking. Today I'm going to tell you about a great speaker, someone who had such an influential role on the civil rights movement in the mid-1950s, up until his death in 1968. None other than Martin Luther King Jr. He was born in Atlanta, Georgia on January 15, 1929 as Michael King Jr. His father, Michael King Sr., became the pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church after the death of his father-in-law in 1931. He also became a very successful minister, and in honor of the German Protestant leader Martin Luther, he took his name and changed his name from Michael King Sr. to Martin Luther King Sr. And his son would later follow in his father's footsteps in becoming the man that you all know today as Martin Luther King Jr., who would go on to inspire and motivate people through his spoken word like the great Protestant leader Martin Luther. According to History.com staff, Martin Luther King Jr., History.com, 2009. The three things that made Martin Luther King Jr. such a great speaker was how he used his voice or cadence, the use of repetition, and how he could connect with his audience. So the first thing I'd like to talk about with you all today is how he used his voice and cadence. In the past, it has always taken a commanding voice to inspire thousands of individuals. Martin Luther King was a well-practiced preacher, and he used cadence, proper pacing, and his preacher-style voice to bring passion to his speeches. Now, cadence, by definition, according to the Merriam-Webster's dictionary, is the way a person's voice changes by gently rising and falling while he or she is speaking. According to Sarah Lloyd Hughes, an award-winning social entrepreneur and founder of Ginger Public Speaking, one of the reasons Martin Luther King Jr. was such a great public speaker was because he used powerful, expressive language to draw an emotional connection with his audience. An example of this is when he says, "Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice," in his I Have a Dream speech. According to Scott Elbin, an executive life coach, when you listen to Martin Luther King's speeches, he always starts slow and in a conversational pace, and then over time slowly increases his pace and volume, drawing in his audience as they would continue to listen to every single word he was saying. Now that we have talked about voice and cadence, I'd like to move on to how Martin Luther King would use repetition. Martin Luther King used repetitive structure, which allowed him to clearly make his main points in his speeches, as well as make it easier for his audience to follow along with what he was saying and his main points. Each use of repetition builds on the one before and is reinforced time and time again by Martin Luther King Jr.'s growing passion as his speech continues to develop. An example of this is from his I Have a Dream speech, when he said, "We can never be satisfied as long as the Negro is the victim of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality. We can never be satisfied as long as our bodies, heavy with fatigue of travel, cannot gain lodging in the motels off the highways and the hotels of the cities. We can never be satisfied as long as the Negro's basic mobility is from a smaller ghetto to a larger one." Now that we have talked a little bit about repetition, let's move on to the next thing, which is connection, and how Martin Luther King used connection to how he would connect to his audience to make his speeches better and to be such a successful speaker. Martin Luther King would connect with his audience by tuning into the energy levels of the audience and in the room. This connection made the events more than a speech. It made it an experience that persuaded people to act. In his I Have a Dream speech, there are many examples of this, and here are a couple. I am not unmindful that some of you have come here out of the great trials and tribulations, he began. King goes on to talk to his audience about their personal situations. Go back to Mississippi. Go back to Alabama. Go back to South Carolina. Go back to Georgia. Go back to Louisiana. Go back to the slums and ghettos of the northern cities, knowing that somehow this situation can and will be changed. King fully connecting to all of them with his eyes through the rest of his speech. Martin Luther King's scriptwriter, Clarence B. Jones, stated, "It was like he had an out-of-body experience." According to Sarah Lloyd Hughes, often it is the speaker who is flexible and vulnerable enough to connect with their audience who has the most powerful impact. In conclusion, Martin Luther King Jr. helped spark the civil rights movement as one of the main leaders. He was also a leader through the Montgomery bus boycott as well as the March on Washington, which helped Congress pass the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. According to History.com staff, Martin Luther King, History.com, 2009. Martin Luther King also won a Nobel Peace Prize in 1964 at the age of 35, being the youngest person to have ever won a Nobel Peace Prize. He was one of the great speakers of his time and one of the most influential people to have ever lived. An individual whose impact is still on society to this very day. Thank you.